If I move up too far, I can't get my car. Yes, I may. Well, you see, I saw him look at his watch. Well, hey, I agree. I think most men our age, my daughters don't have watches. What's the point? No, you've got to use a watch. And then they can't read my analog watch. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm sorry I'm a little late. My granddaughter had an incident before we got here. And Avery got there over their house early. Okay. My husband don't put the microphone down here. Uh-oh. Okay, somehow Oh. You know what? This is kind of starting out like the book we're going to be starting, Ecclesiastes. So turn to that. We're going to be starting that today. Okay, can everybody hear me? How many of you find Ecclesiastes your favorite book of the Bible? I don't think so either. In fact, I would recommend that anybody who's feeling depressed, do not read Ecclesiastes. It's kind of like some movies that I refuse to watch if I'm feeling depressed or down. I don't go to them because I know that's not going to help me. And Ecclesiastes is, in my opinion, by far the most depressing book in the Bible. When I taught this in college, my students kind of, by the time we finished, got toward the end of Ecclesiastes, they were kind of in rebellion because they couldn't figure out, why are you teaching this? It's so negative. Everything seems so hopeless. And I said, look, hang in there. Wait to the end. It was a course on the wisdom literature. And so we'd looked at Job, which itself has, pretty difficult questions. And then Ecclesiastes. And fortunately, they hung in there. And on the final day, one of the main students, Mark Brackney, who worked at York not too long ago, he came up to me after the final and said, Dr. Houston, I'm so glad that we took this course, because when we finished it, we understood. And but that's the only time I felt like I had a classroom almost rebel on me. Okay, it starts out, the words of the teacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. And who would that be? Solomon, right? Who was known as a man of wisdom and great power and wealth. And he says, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Now, would you want to continue watching a movie that started out with that line? Now, the older translations, and even some of the, I noticed a new Revised Standard, surprisingly, says, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. And remember in the older King James Version, vanity doesn't quite communicate the right meaning here. Because when we hear the word vanity, what do we think about? Yeah, they think they're hot stuff, And isn't there that Carly Simon song, He's So Vain? You know, vanity. Vanity, we think about, you know, the glamour, someone who thinks they're really glamorous and good looking, all that. Or the other way is that you're vain, you're conceited. Oh, he's so vain, so arrogant. So the Hebrew word here is hebel, hebeth, and it can be translated several ways: meaningless, futile, pointless, um, not making sense. So it's a very negative meaning word. And if you think about it, we don't want to think of our lives as meaningless, do we? No. Do you want to think of your work as meaningless? I hope not. Boy, that's a tough way to go to work. Now, granted, a few times I can remember going to work and feeling like, what's the point? We all have those days, don't we? But if we feel that way all the time about a job, we probably better get a different job. Okay? Or relationships. Hopefully, we don't ever feel that way about our family. Okay? Our wife or husband or children or parents. That would be extremely down or depressing. Okay? But he is starting out, he calls himself the teacher, and the Hebrew word is koheleth. And that word can mean a teacher, a preacher, a collector of sayings. And one German scholar, von Rad, describes the structure of Ecclesiastes as very similar to the Egyptian royal testament. And the Hebrew wisdom literature does have similarities to the wisdom literature of Egypt and Babylon. And in some cases, there's some sayings that are very, very similar. So he's already pointed out his conclusion. Everything is meaningless. Everything is futile. Everything is purposeless. So he begins in verse 3. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. People come and go. The only thing constant is the earth. It's always here, but we aren't, nor is our work. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the north, or to the south, and to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams, all rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. It's all a cycle, you know. And being a cycle, what's the overall purpose? It's not achieving a particular end. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear is full of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? It was already here long ago. It was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. Now, there's some questions. Is there anything new under the sun? I think as modern people, we would wonder about that statement, wouldn't we? I know there's a lot of things new since I've been alive. I remember, and of course my grandchildren are usually in shock when they hear this, I remember when there was no internet. Okay? I even remember watching TV when we didn't have a color TV. And we didn't have high definition TV. What?
I remember being the antenna.
And I think back, I'm going to be 72 in September, and just the changes that I've seen in my lifetime are pretty amazing. And I think back to my parents. My mom was born in 1916, my dad in 1922, and think about the changes they saw in terms of our technology. Okay, we have landed numerous men on the moon. So what is he talking about here? There's nothing new under the sun.
Well, I just can't help when I read that section think about how we study history because history has a tendency to repeat itself. That's what I think.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one. What things don't change? History?
Human nature.
Does history kind of repeat itself?
We still are the same. Like, we're all humans, so we all have the things we struggle with or the things we're good at, but it's like the human nature of it. We're kind, but sometimes we're not. We can communicate with others, but sometimes we don't. It's that kind of stuff. That hasn't changed.
Right. Do we still have to work?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then the point I was going to make, has human nature changed? As modern and glorious as we are, it's so fortunate we've eliminated war, we've eliminated violence, we've eliminated stealing, we've eliminated corruption, we've eliminated bad politics, right? No. Yes.
I just think it's funny that you think some of the technology is changed. I think it's nothing compared to the discovery of fire or the harnessing of fire. It's nothing compared to the invented wheel. So it seems like a big deal to us.
Yeah, if you go back far enough, you see so many things that were more important for the overall development. Well, I often think about the first Native Americans immigrating from what is now known as Russia and populating all the way to the very tip of South America, all the way to the East Coast. They didn't have cars. They didn't have horses. Yeah, they didn't have wagons or anything. And yet they settled 2 continents well before any Europeans found those continents. So when you look back, a lot has changed, but on the other hand, nothing really has changed. The important things have not changed, particularly our human conduct. Yes?
I was thinking about the song that we sing, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases.
Mm-hmm.
His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. So is there anything new under the sun?
Well, and we're jumping ahead because Jesus is the answer. But Ecclesiastes doesn't know that yet, does he? And Solomon's just trying to, I forgot to turn my phone. I better do this because I'll probably get a call. Well, maybe not, but assuming I can remember how to do this. Okay, sound and vibration. Mute. Okay, now I don't have to worry. I usually do this before I walk in the door, but I was too busy worried about being late and getting another cup of coffee. The important things. So there is, in many ways, nothing new under the sun. Now, Solomon, he saw within his lifetime changes in politics and changes in his own country. I mean, think about everything he built, everything that he expanded politically. So he's not talking literally about, there's nothing new. But he is talking about in a larger universal sense. Everything's basically the same. We still have to live and work and have relationships and get along with everybody, and that doesn't change. And, when you look back at history, what were the Dark Ages?
It was a fall. The Dark Ages were a fall. There was brilliance before it, and there's brilliance after it. But the Dark Ages was a
Well, oftentimes modern people think about the Dark Ages as after the Roman Empire fell and we went through the Middle Ages until the Renaissance and about the 16th century came. But I think you could really actually argue that the 20th century is the Dark Age. Far more people were killed in wars in the 20th century than all of history combined before. There's been far more gruesome ways that have been developed to kill. You just think about modern weapons. Back in the Dark Ages, they had spears and swords, maybe some catapulting of rocks, that kind of thing. What do we have today? Machine guns, flamethrowers, bazookas, bombs, atomic bombs. We have found even better ways to kill ourselves. Okay? And far more people have died because of not only war, but also, interestingly, of disease. You think about the 1918 influenza outbreak. 50 million people died. And we recently, in our pandemic, we had over 1 million Americans die. And I don't remember how many millions overall throughout the world. So that's been within our own lifetime. We've seen so much that I think you can argue the 20th century particularly was the darkest age. So again, all that we modern Americans and people in the world even, we think we are the enlightened age, we are the progressive age, we have advanced so much. But like Solomon says, we really haven't. We're still having major problems that we can't deal with. Are you depressed yet? So then, in verse 12, I, the teacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem. I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. What a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. I have seen all things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Can you catch the wind? That's quite an image of chasing the wind. Or as Bob Dylan later wrote, things are blowing in the wind. Okay? We can't even see the wind. We can just see the effects. We can't catch it. And we don't even know how come it comes and goes and why it comes and goes. We've got very little wind today, but who knows if we have a big storm, we could have a lot of wind like we did last week up in Omaha. What is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. And then I applied myself to understanding of wisdom, and also I contemplated madness or insanity and folly. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. So what is Solomon saying? Okay, let's look at wisdom and knowledge. Is that the answer? I've looked at it all. I've looked at all the wisdom. and even the opposite. Everything that's foolish, everything that's even madness, insanity. Okay, and that hasn't helped me figure out what is the meaning of life. And then he says in verse 18, and this is a very true statement, for with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. How is that true? You ever thought to yourself, I wish I didn't know that?
Just think about the news.
TikTok?
Well, no, I'm saying the news.
Oh, yeah.
Media.
Yeah.
You didn't.
And part of our world anxiety is really compounded by the social media and all the news we're exposed to. And the more you watch the news, you know, and they don't report a whole lot of positive, do they? You know? And if, remember years ago, I had to stop watching the news when I would eat supper. It did not agree with me. And there are times, again, if I'm feeling down or depressed, I'm not going to watch. I'm not going to get on the social media sites. Because we have so much excessive, in my opinion, exposure to the news and the social life of people we really shouldn't know anything about anyway, you know, there is much sorrow. There's much sorrow, grief, anxiety, stress. And Solomon didn't have, you know, the social media by any means, but he knew the more you know about a lot of things, the more you worry, the more you maybe wonder why. Can you think of some other examples of how knowledge can create sorrow?
Well, one thing I can think of is some of the happiest people in the world are some of our disabled children, because they don't have that knowledge of the world, and they're just happy. Whereas we that are intaking that knowledge all the time and every day, and the world gets scarier and scarier, and we're seeing it happening, that builds on our anxiety over and over again.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Having had a lot of experience working with disabled kids and kids in general, they don't know a lot of things, but they're a lot happier. Sometimes we think back, boy, I wish I could be a kid again. Well, not when I want to go to a movie or go to a fine restaurant. But at times, you know, one of the joys I had in childhood was playing sports all the time. We had so many kids in the neighborhood, we could play football, basketball, baseball all the time. I can't do that anymore. I remember when I went to college and, well, at York, I played soccer my first year, but then went to Pepperdine, I didn't play sports. And I remember that was a hard transition for me. How am I going to enjoy things? I can't play. I can't play my sports. I wasn't quite good enough to continue playing those sports. So sometimes, you know, the more we gain in ability even, the more sorrowful we are. Okay, Marcy?
I think that it's hard knowing the truth about what the Bible says when you see people and understand that they're going to be lost. It's really, really hard when God opens your eyes and sees your loved ones or you know, people that you care about who are making the wrong choices. It's really hard and depressing.
Yes, it can be. I remember years ago at Pepperdine, we had a man come out from Texas. He'd never been to LA before. He was a great inspiration, but I remember one time he got up to speak, and he said one of the hardest things that he had experienced moving to LA is when he was on the freeway, just looking at all the cars, all the people, and realizing how many were not going to be saved. Sometimes even the more we know about a subject can become a little bit depressing or sorrowful. Sometimes you realize how much you don't know, and that could be a bit of a downer. Now, I tell people the difference between getting a master's and a PhD, one of the differences is that a master's, you finish your master's, you think, boy, I know a lot. I know so much more. When you finish your PhD, what you realize, you do know more, but you also realize how much you'll never know. And that's a real awakening, you know, to realize that, well, I know a lot about this subject, but on the other hand, there's a lot of things that I'll never know. I'll never be able to prove. I'll never be able to research out because there's still too many unknowables. And sometimes that can bring sorrow, because sometimes in our egotistical state, we think, oh, if I just knew it all. And sometimes we think, yeah, I can do that. I can be that person. I can be that genius, that, you know, person who just knows everything, you know. And the more you learn, the more you realize you'll never do that. In fact, I used to tell students that one of the ways you know you have truly been educated is when you realize that you will never know it all. People who think they know it all are not very well educated, because the more you learn, the more you realize that you're never going to get to that point. And sometimes that brings sorrow, regret. It should bring humility too. Or I used to think about it. I came across some students who, you know, they always got seemingly the top grades, and I would always warn them, be careful, there's always at least one person faster on the draw. Okay? And that was my experience. I never was the very top. I always had at least one kid who got higher grades. But I was okay with that. Okay. He ended up being a good friend anyway. But it is a little bit depressing. Sometimes the more you know, you wish you didn't know. You know, I don't know I don't want to know all the crime occurring even in this city. You know, I don't sit Nick down and say, okay, Nick, give me a list of all the crimes you dealt with this week. One thing I know, he wouldn't want to do that, because I live next door to a Bellevue police supervisor, and we both agreed I wasn't going to talk about all my horrible students. He wasn't going to talk about people he had to deal with in the community, because we did not want to think about that at home. But I wouldn't want to know that, oh, on this corner somebody got robbed, on this corner somebody got beat up. We don't have to worry about that much here in Nebraska City, but having lived in big cities, there are things you have to worry about. There are certain places you don't want to be at night. Okay?
I think that goes back to a lot of how we see people. And we're all chosen by God, whether we choose God or not. But we're all broken too. And we all have our own stories. And how do we approach that? Especially as Christians, how do we look at others who aren't like me and figure out how to love them anyway?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as Christians, that you know, we're seeing people through a different lens. You know, and sometimes we have to be careful, because there are evil people in the world, but we have to be careful not to put them down, but look at them as people who are struggling, who maybe, if we have a chance, can reach out to and maybe bring them to Christ. I've been around, and you probably have been around people who basically think all people are just terrible. You know, last Sunday I preached about not becoming bitter, and people who judge people that way generally tend to be bitter people. Nobody's good. Everybody's terrible. Everything's terrible. And we don't want to be around people like that. And we certainly never, as Christians, want to become like that. Because did Jesus ever reach out to the undesirables in his society? Did he get criticized for it? What are you doing with these prostitutes? What are you doing going to the tax collector's house? What are you doing going to this person's house who everybody in the community knows is a sinner? But Jesus was making a point, wasn't he? Okay. Jesus, did he know about these people? Yes. Did he become so sorrowful he didn't want to have anything to do with them? No. So, with much knowledge comes sorrow or grief. And I think that's such a true statement. We have to be very much aware of the limitations. And Solomon is saying, okay, this is the limitation that I discovered about wisdom in general, knowledge in general. Now, he's not saying wisdom and knowledge are not worth something, but he is saying it has its limits. It has its drawbacks. So in chapter 2, then, he starts to list possible avenues that will lead to happiness and fulfillment. And these, the things that he describes are things that people to this day pursue and mistakenly think, oh, if I could just do this enough, I'll be happy. So let's look at verse 1 here. I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. Okay, let's go with pleasure. Let's see if we can be happy and have fun and enjoy life. Is that going to give me what I'm looking for? Well, he starts out by giving his conclusion, but that too proved meaningless. And then he starts listing. Laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself up with wine and embracing folly. My mind still guiding me with wisdom, I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. So he starts out with wine. Now, do people attempt to find pleasure and meaning in alcohol, drugs, things that, intoxicate them? And they think they're going to find happiness that way? Unfortunately, yes, right? And maybe some of us have had to go through that experience and eventually realize that, that's not going to really make me happy. When you're in college, you think it does. I never drank much at all, and I always was puzzled to see how many people thought that's how you have fun. Hey, if you're going to have a party, you've got to have lots of booze. And growing up in the 60s and early 70s, for my generation, it was you got to have booze and drugs. Okay. And I didn't go to, a few parties I went to, I realized that's not for me. Okay. Unfortunately, some of my siblings got into that lifestyle, and became alcoholics. So wine, pleasure as a whole, you're not going to find meaning in that. And then he says in verse 5, I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water the groves of flourishing trees. So he had a wonderful garden. How many of you like to garden? Okay. It does bring a lot of pleasure, doesn't it? Assuming you, unlike me, know how to do it. I don't have a green thumb. I think mine is purple at best. But I enjoy seeing a garden. Have you ever been to the Sunken Gardens in Lincoln? Oh, you've got to go there. It's on 27th Street between A and South.
We're at Children's Zoo.
And it is one of the most spectacular gardens you'll ever see. It's worth a day trip. But he planted all these gardens, all these great estates. You think about when I was in Europe, I went to some of the great mansions and estates. And the one that impressed me the most was the one in Vienna, the Schönberg Palace. And it's equivalent to Versailles. And it was overwhelming. I mean, I expected it to be nice, but just looking in the back of the house at the grounds, it was huge and just meticulously landscaped and everything. It was just, if I ever get back there, my wife Linda's never been to Germany, even though she's part German, and I'm going to go to, I'm hoping her health might improve, that we can go to Germany and Austria. I want to show her that. So this is, again, a beautiful estate. You think about today, people who have a lot of money, entertainers, politicians, rich business people, you know, how big are their mansions? How big are their estates? You know, the bigger the better, right? Well, this is what Solomon is partly describing. I had all this beautiful estate, just gorgeous gardens and grounds. And you can imagine Solomon's palace, you know, being part of that. And how many people today, you know, that is their high point. That's what they consider to be the greatest thing. Oh, if I can grow up and have a mansion like Beyonce, or like Jeff Bezos, or Bill Gates, that'll be the life. Okay. Interesting, Warren Buffett isn't like that. He still lives in a house just to the east of Elmwood Park. And it's a nice house, but nothing like one of the world's richest men. And I believe he still drives a Buick, an older Buick. He doesn't have a Rolls Royce or anything like that. So, but he's the exception.
And he's left none of his riches to his children.
Sorry, what?
He's left none of his riches to his children.
I'm having trouble.
He's left none of his riches to his children.
Right. He gave them a certain amount years ago, and he expected them to invest in it and use it. And many of his kids have endowed a lot of good charities. You know, they've been very responsible. So he is one of the few rich men I truly do admire, because of not only his abilities, but what he's done with it. And I think when he dies, he's donating all of his estate to charity. You know, I think he's already given like many billions to the Bill Gates Foundation. But Solomon says that, you know, all this, I've tried that. And then he talks about another feature that comes with the rich and wealthy is that I had all sorts of slaves and servants to serve me. Now, once again, if you have a big mansion, do you have attendants, servants? Not slaves, but, you know, butlers, you know, all these different, you have certain people that take care of your estate. Let's put it this way. Bill Gates does not vacuum. Okay. He probably doesn't cook. He doesn't clean his windows. He pays people to do all this. And this is what Solomon is talking about. Okay. You know, it'd be wonderful to think about, you know, hey, I don't have to do any of that stuff. I've got so much money, I can pay people to do this. I don't have to mow my lawn. Can you imagine Bill Gates mowing his lawn? Well, one thing, you'd have to have one of those big lawn tractors. But I don't see that happening. Well, Solomon had enough money and wealth that he had all these servants to do all these things to make his life easier. In verses 8 through 10, he had large herds and flocks. And again, he's talking about possessions and money. So far here, am I going to find meaning in life through pleasure, through wine and fun and intoxication? Am I going to find pleasure through my big estate and the servants that I can hire to do all the work for me? And verses 5 through 10, large herds. Can I find meaning in all that I possess? How many people think, if I could just have all of this, I'll find happiness. I'll find my meaning in life. You know? And then in verse 5, and we've got to wrap up here. No, part of 8 through 10. He could hire singers. How many people, hey, I can hire my own entertainment, music. That will give me ultimate satisfaction. And then finally, sex. I have a harem. So, he's kind of sex, drugs, rock and roll, sex, intoxicants, music, fun, pleasure. He's trying all of these things. All the things that we modern people think is going to give us ultimate happiness and fulfillment. And so at the end of chapter 2, this will be my last point. Well, I'm sorry. In verse 16, the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die. So you can have all of this stuff, but in the end, you and the fool you're going to die. So what does it really come to? What is really meaningful? And again, I'm assuming John will be going on next week to get into chapter 3 and further discuss Solomon's pursuit of meaning in life. Thank you for your attendance, and I'm sorry for my poor hearing. I had to step up so close to you guys, but I'm going to have to admit I'm getting older. Okay. And that's the